When I think back to my childhood, there are a few memories that still send chills down my spine. Most of them faded with time, the way nightmares do after you wake up. But one night, when I was around 9 years old, left a scar in my memory that never healed. As a kid, I was always scared of the dark. My parents used to joke about me being too old to ask for a nightlight, but they gave me one anyway. A small blue lamp in the corner of my room, just bright enough to keep the shadows away. Or at least, that's what I thought. I remember lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while listening to the faint creaks of our old house. My parents were already asleep down the hall. It was past midnight when I heard something I couldn't explain. A soft, dragging noise from directly under my bed. At first, I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe the heater kicking on. But when the sound came again, slow, deliberate, like fingernails scraping against wood, I froze. I pulled the blanket over my face, too scared to move, my heart pounding so loud, I swore whatever was under there could hear it. And then I heard it breathe. I remember gripping the blanket so tightly that my fingers hurt. I didn't want to look, but the thought of something breathing beneath me was unbearable. I slowly peeked over the covers toward the nightlight, hoping its glow would make me feel safe, but instead, the dim blue light only made the shadows seem darker. For a while, I lay completely still, straining my ears. That's when I heard it again. A faint inhale, followed by a shaky exhale. It wasn't the sound of a heater or pipes creaking. It was unmistakably the sound of someone, or something, trying to stay quiet. My first thought was that it had to be my brother, but then I remembered he was spending the night at a friend's house. I was alone in that room. I wanted to scream for my parents, but fear clamped my throat shut. I thought if I moved, whatever was under my bed would reach out and grab me. So instead I kept my eyes glued to the edge of my bed frame, watching the tiny sliver of darkness between the floor and the mattress. Minutes passed. The house was silent except for the faint breathing beneath me. My mind started racing with explanations. Maybe an animal had gotten inside. But no, this was steady, deliberate, human-like. Suddenly, I felt the mattress shift. Not a lot, just enough that I knew something had pressed against it from underneath. I bit down on my lips so hard I almost drew blood, trying not to make a sound. I don't remember how long I stayed like that, paralyzed in fear, but at some point my body betrayed me. My bladder was full, and I had to go to the bathroom. The thought of putting my feet on the floor was unbearable. My toes hovered at the edge of the bed, and I whispered to myself over and over, "It's not real. It's not real." Finally, I gathered the courage to move. I slid off the bed as quickly as I could and sprinted down the hallway toward the bathroom. My parents' bedroom door was closed, and I debated waking them up, but I was too scared they'd laugh at me. Inside the bathroom, I shut the door and turned the light on. I remember leaning against the sink, breathing hard, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. When I finally calmed down enough, I made the mistake of glancing back down the hallway toward my room. That's when I saw it. The faint glow of my nightlight spilled into the hall, and in that light, just for a second, I swear I saw something move. A pale hand, long, bony fingers, curling around the edge of my doorway. I slammed the bathroom door shut and sat on the floor, crying quietly, too terrified to make a sound. I stayed there for what felt like hours, too afraid to go back to bed, too afraid to tell anyone. By the time I finally crawled back to my room near sunrise, the door was wide open, and the space under my bed looked completely normal. But I knew what I heard, and I knew what I saw. The next night, I begged my parents to let me sleep in their room, but of course they brushed it off. My dad told me I was letting my imagination run wild, that I was too old to believe in monsters. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of that hand curling around my doorway. When bedtime came, I sat on my bed with the light still on, staring at the floor. My parents turned the lights out, and soon, the blue nightlight was the only glow left in my room. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, every muscle in my body tense. Waiting. For a while, nothing happened. The house was quiet. I even started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But just as my eyelids grew heavy, I heard it again, that faint inhale, a slow, steady breath from directly beneath me. My chest tightened. I leaned over the edge of the bed just far enough to glance at the floor. The darkness underneath seemed deeper than it should have been. And then 2 eyes opened. I froze. They weren't glowing or anything supernatural. They were just eyes, human, but unblinking, staring straight at me from the shadows under the bed. I tried to scream, but my voice cracked into a whisper. The thing shifted, and I heard the unmistakable sound of nails dragging across the wooden floorboards. I shot up, bolted from my bed, and sprinted straight to my parents' room, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. When my dad finally followed me back, he knelt down and lifted the blanket skirt from under my bed. I stood behind him, clutching my mom's hand, waiting for someone, to be revealed. But it was empty. Nothing but dust and a couple of old toys. My dad gave me a stern look, annoyed more than anything, and told me to get back in bed, but I refused. That night, I slept on their bedroom floor, wrapped in a spare blanket. Still, when I closed my eyes, I could see those eyes staring back at me. The next morning, I tried convincing myself it was a dream. But when I went back to my room later that day, I noticed something strange. The toys under my bed, the ones that had always been pushed to the back, were scattered near the front, and scratched into the wood floorboards beneath where I had slept were several long, uneven marks, almost like claw marks, or like fingernails desperately trying to reach upward. I never told my parents about the scratches. I knew they wouldn't believe me. I barely believed myself. But every time I walked into my room, my eyes were drawn to those marks on the floor, etched deep into the wood. They weren't random, each one angled upward, all reaching toward the spot where I had slept. For months after that, I refused to sleep in my bed. I'd sneak into the living room and curl up on the couch, or sometimes just crash on the floor in my brother's room when he wasn't paying attention. My parents thought it was just a phase, but I knew better. Years later, when we moved out of that house, I went back into my old room one last time. The bed was gone, the carpet rolled up, and the floorboards were fully exposed. The scratches were still there, only deeper and darker than I remembered, like something had kept clawing long after I stopped sleeping there. Even now, as an adult, I can't sleep in total darkness. I need a light on, no matter where I am, because sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, I swear I can still hear it. That slow, deliberate breathing, just inches beneath me. Every kid has that one place in their neighborhood they're warned to stay away from. For me, it was the old house across the street. It wasn't abandoned, not exactly. Someone lived there, but nobody ever saw them come or go. The curtains were always drawn, the yard overgrown, and at night, a single dim light would glow in the upstairs window. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew each other, so the silence surrounding that house felt unnatural. Parents told their kids not to wander too close, and rumors spread fast among us children. Some said the house was haunted. Others whispered that a murderer lived inside. I never believed those stories. At least, not until I started noticing something strange when I was around 10 years old. Every time I played outside, whether I was riding my bike, tossing a ball, or just hanging out with friends, I felt eyes on me. At first I thought it was paranoia, but then I saw it. A figure, barely visible behind those dusty curtains, standing in the upstairs window, motionless, watching. And the worst part? No matter what time of day it was or what I was doing, that shadowy figure never seemed to look away. At first I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just the shape of the curtains, or a trick of the light, but the more I noticed it, the harder it became to ignore. The figure didn't move like a shadow should. It shifted slightly, like someone leaning closer to the glass. One summer afternoon, I was out riding my bike when I glanced up and saw it again. A pale outline in the upstairs window, staring directly at me. My stomach dropped, and I pedaled home faster than I ever had before. That night, I told my mom about it. She brushed it off immediately. "Probably just your imagination," she said. "No one lives there anymore." That didn't make sense. If no one lived there, then who or what kept that upstairs light on every single night? Over the next few weeks, it became an obsession. Every time I walked past that house, I'd force myself to look at the window. And every single time, the figure was there. Sometimes closer, sometimes further back in the shadows, but always watching. One night, my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my binoculars, the kind I used for bird watching, and aimed them at the window from my bedroom. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a man. His face was pale, almost gray in the dim light, with sunken eyes that never seemed to blink. He wasn't standing still out of accident. He was pressed against the glass, his mouth slightly open, like he was trying to get closer without being seen. I stumbled backward, dropped the binoculars, and didn't dare look again for days. But eventually, I couldn't help myself. I needed to know if he was still there. So one evening, I sat at my window for hours, waiting. Around midnight, when the street was silent, I finally saw movement. The curtain shifted. The man was gone. For the first time in weeks, the window was empty. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Because as I turned away from my window, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Across the street, at ground level, one of the downstairs curtains was moving. Something, or someone, was now watching me from much closer than before. I remember pulling my blanket over my head like I had when I was little, but it didn't help. Even with my eyes closed, I could feel it, that heavy, suffocating stare that made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep a second that night. The next morning, I told my dad what I had seen. He gave me the same look my mom had, a mix of disbelief and mild annoyance. "That house has been empty for years," he said firmly. "Don't go making up stories." But I knew what I saw. That night, I decided to prove it. I stayed up in my room with the lights off, binoculars in hand, staring at the house. Hours passed. Midnight came and went, and for a while, the upstairs window stayed dark. Then, sometime past 1 a.m., the light flickered on. I raised the binoculars with shaking hands. The curtain was parted just enough to see the figure again. He was closer this time, so close that I could make out details I wish I hadn't. His skin looked paper-thin, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. His lips were dry and cracked, but the worst part were his eyes. They were wide, too wide, unblinking, and locked on mine as if he knew I was watching. I dropped the binoculars, heart pounding, but I couldn't look away. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared. Suddenly, the light in the window went out. My entire body went cold. I sat frozen at my desk, the house across the street now completely dark. I told myself it was over, that maybe he'd gone away. But then I saw something that made my stomach twist into knots. The streetlight in front of my house flickered. For a brief second, I saw him, not in the window, but on the sidewalk, standing perfectly still, facing my house. I stumbled backward, tripping over a chair, and scrambled into bed. I yanked the blanket over my head, shaking uncontrollably, and prayed I was imagining things. The last thing I remember before I passed out from exhaustion was the faint creak of our front porch steps. The next morning, I ran straight to the front door to check. Nothing was out of place. No footprints on the porch, no sign that anyone had been there. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it had all been a dream. But when I looked back across the street, my blood turned to ice. The upstairs curtain was open wider than I'd ever seen before. And there, in the center of the window, was something new, a chair. It was pulled right up against the glass, facing my house. And sitting in that chair was the man. Only now, in the daylight, his face was clearer. His skin looked sickly and pale, his mouth twisted into the faintest grin. I backed away from the window, heart racing, and refused to look again. I tried to tell my parents, but they wouldn't hear it. To them, the house was still empty. They said maybe a squatter had moved in, but when the police were called to check a few days later, they found the place completely vacant. No furniture, no sign of anyone ever living there. And yet, that very same night, the upstairs light flicked on again. I don't live on that street anymore, but sometimes when I visit my old neighborhood, I can't help but glance at that window. And almost every time, I see the same pale figure, sitting there, still watching. Every family has that one rule kids don't fully understand. For me, it was never open the basement door. My parents didn't lock it, but they made it clear. Under no circumstances was I ever to go down there alone. As a child, I thought it was just because the basement was dark and unfinished, with creaky wooden stairs that looked ready to collapse. My mom always said it was too dangerous, but even then, something about her tone felt off. It wasn't just about safety. It was like she was afraid of something down there. The door itself was strange. Unlike the rest of our house, which was warm and welcoming, the basement door was heavy, painted a dull gray, with a knob that was always colder than the rest of the house. Sometimes at night, when the house was quiet, I swore I could hear faint noises coming from behind it. Not the hum of the furnace or pipes, but something else, like a shuffle or a soft tap against the wood. I tried to ignore it, but kids are curious, and curiosity has a way of pulling you toward the very things you're told to stay away from. One night, when I was about 11, I finally gave in. I reached for the knob of the basement door, and what I found on the other side still haunts me to this day. The night I finally decided to open that door, I remember the house being unusually quiet. My parents had gone to bed early, and my brother was away at a friend's house for the weekend. That left me alone in the living room, staring at the dull gray door at the end of the hallway. I told myself I'd only peek, just a quick look, enough to finally satisfy my curiosity. When I wrapped my hand around the knob, a shiver ran down my arm. It was ice cold, as if the basement were a different temperature than the rest of the house. I twisted slowly, and the door gave a soft groan as it swung open. The air that drifted out was damp, carrying a faint earthy smell, like soil mixed with something sour. I clicked on the hall light and leaned forward. The top of the wooden staircase stretched downward into blackness, the shadows swallowing everything beyond the third step. I should have shut the door right there, but I couldn't. I wanted to know what my parents were hiding. Step by step, I began to descend. The wood creaked under my weight, echoing through the dark like it was announcing my arrival. I gripped the railing, my heart thudding with each movement. Halfway down, I froze. Somewhere in the darkness below, I heard it. A shuffle. Not the scurrying of an animal, not the hum of machinery. This was deliberate. Slow, like bare feet dragging across concrete. I wanted to run back upstairs, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I leaned forward, squinting into the shadows. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. There was light, faint, almost like the glow of a candle, flickering just out of view at the bottom of the stairs. I told myself, my parents must have left something on. Maybe my dad had been working down there and forgot. But even as I tried to reason with myself, I knew that wasn't true. They never let us near the basement, and I had never once seen them carry anything down those steps. Summoning what little courage I had, I crept further until my foot touched the concrete floor. The smell was stronger here, sour and damp, and the air felt heavy, pressing against my chest. I followed the faint glow, each step echoing through the silence. My eyes adjusted just enough to see the outline of boxes stacked along the walls, old furniture draped in dusty sheets, and cobwebs hanging thick in the corners. Then, at the far end of the basement, I saw it. Not a candle, not a flashlight, but a small lantern flickering beside something I could barely make out. A figure, crouched low, its head bent forward as if it hadn't noticed me yet. I froze, breath caught in my throat, too terrified to even turn back. And then, it moved. The figure's head tilted upward. As the figure raised its head, I finally saw its face, or what was left of one. Pale skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, eyes sunken deep into shadow, and lips cracked open as if it hadn't spoken in years. For a split second, I thought it was some kind of mannequin left behind in storage. But then it blinked. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a box, and the sound must have alerted it. The figure shifted, its limbs unfolding in jerky, unnatural movements, like it hadn't stood up in a very long time. It was tall, far taller than anyone in my family, with arms that seemed to hang too low at its sides. "Hello?" I whispered before I could stop myself, my voice trembling. The thing let out a sound, low and rattling, almost like a laugh, but broken, as if its throat couldn't quite form it. Then it stepped forward. The dim lantern light caught its hands, long fingers with yellowed nails that scraped against the concrete as it moved. My heart pounded as I backed toward the stairs, but the wood creaked behind me, and I realized the door at the top was closed. I hadn't even noticed shutting it. The figure stopped when I reached the middle of the basement. For a moment, we just stood there, me gasping for air, it watching me with those hollow eyes. And then it tilted its head back and made a sound I will never forget. A shrill, rasping wail that filled the entire basement. Vibrating in my bones, I bolted, sprinting up the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't dare look back, but I heard it. Its footsteps slapping against the concrete floor, then pounding against the first steps behind me. The sound was frantic, almost desperate, like it was chasing me with everything it had. I slammed into the basement door at the top, clawing at the knob until it finally gave way. I threw myself into the hallway, slammed the door shut, and pressed my weight against it. For a moment, there was silence. Then, 3 loud knocks against the other side of the door. Not fists, knuckles. Slow, measured, as if whatever it was wanted me to know it could wait. I stayed there, pressed against the door, too terrified to move. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped, but the silence that followed felt worse, like it was still there, waiting just inches away. Eventually, I gathered the courage to run to my parents' room. I shook them awake, sobbing, trying to explain what I had seen. My dad looked frustrated, but my mom, she went pale. She didn't say a word. She just held me tightly until I calmed down, then promised me I'd never have to go near the basement again. True to her word, the door was locked the very next day. A heavy padlock hung from it, and my parents never mentioned the basement again. But I never forgot. Years later, when I was in high school, I overheard my parents talking late at night. My dad was upset, whispering that it was getting louder, and my mom said something that still haunts me. She said, "As long as we keep the door locked, it can't leave the basement." I don't know what I saw down there. I don't know if it was ever human. But sometimes, even now, when I visit that old house, I swear I can hear it. 3 slow knocks from behind the basement door.